To all the good folks home at YouTube and Rumble, this is not live. This is actually pre-recorded, so I appreciate you tuning in and checking out the video and the content. I was approached by someone, J.K. Love. I don't know if that's like J.K. Rowling or if that's a pun or what that is, but someone that was in the Econoboy Discord that basically stated that, you know, hey, I have some libertarian leanings, but I think some of this stuff is a little wild. I want to talk with someone that kind of understands this stuff because, you know, I think there's some issues or some things that I don't see. Could you clear it up for me? Or maybe I'm just right and it's a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And like originally it was like, maybe we should debate it or something. And I was like, no, man, like this sounds like a good conversation. So let's have a good conversation. Yeah. And so I was like, all right, well, let's set up a time. Eventually we're able to set one up. It's finally occurring. So why don't you tell me kind of your side, why you're here? And I'd love to just have like a little bit of a back and forth because I actually do like these simpler conversations where I'm just able to discuss the theory without being super antagonistic or anything.
Yeah, well, I had just like, the thing is like, hopefully, because I'm in this discussion, how I talk is how I talk. Like I got into like more economics, like, you know, I'm in my like, you know, early kind of like 30s, and like I've been to college, I've worked 11 jobs, and like it is true when you're younger that you lean, it is on average you lean leftwards. That doesn't mean that there's older people. Like I know family members I know that are I know one that's like my parents' age and he's very left leaning and very mainstream. But I used to be like that. I used to be like, man, like let's get some socialism to take. And then when it was what was it? Oh God, the Prime Minister of the UK during World War II. I can't remember. Jesus. Winston Churchill, right? Like, you know, that famously stated that, you know, if you're not a liberal, you know, if you're not a liberal when you're, you know, you're young, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no intel, you have no brain. You know, like I'll look up the exact quote some other time. But yeah, I mean, I think that is a kind of an understanding that's true. You know, with age and experience and paying taxes comes a certain level of wisdom and real world experience and pragmatism and a certain killing of that activist spirit, right? And more of a like, let's compromise, let's relax, you know. But
that plays into that.
Yeah, but in doing so, like I looked more into it, and then the reality to it is like I started like listening to Second Thought, and then he was like, at first he was like, yes, you know, socialism to this, capitalism kills this, capitalism, and then it's like, well, the reality to it, even though we have Keynesian economics, we have free market state intervention, like I would say like we're pretty predominantly
of a
like
market
capitalist.
economy.
Yeah, a general regulated market economy. And you look at the reality to it, right? Like capitalism can only work in a free country. It can't work in an oppressive country. It can't work in a dictator country. And yeah, you could make the argument it sucks to work up, and you know, there's people that own these corporations, they do these things, but like the standard of living objectively has been great under capitalism, and no other system could beat that.
I would say that no system that exists is truly capitalistic as it stands right now. But many countries are closer, and it tends to be that the closer you get towards capitalism, the better things are, because it is the most efficient system of delivering what people value to those people that value, right?
Yeah.
And that the more that the state intervenes in that process, the less efficient the economic market-based, the market economy is at delivering, trading, etc., things people value to the people that value. And so I think, you know, and so I would say that, like, yes, capitalism is based and amazing, but like there are a lot of variations of mixed market economies. You know, like you see the Nordic model, for example, is hyper capitalistic, and socialists love to use it as an example of socialism because they have a
not.
very large, they have a very, very large welfare state, a lot of wealth
Welfare
redistribution,
state,
right? And so it's like, it's not perfect. And they'll say, well, this proves welfare, this proves, welfare and wealth redistribution works. And it's like, well, it proves that welfare and wealth redistribution can work for a period of time when you're not comparing it to a country without those things. You're only comparing it to more regulated, less capitalistic countries. And what does that mean?
And the thing is, like, Norway and like the Nordic model, if you look into it, it has less of a population. Is how much? It's very, majority this, predominantly this. Is not much of a melting pot compared to the United States. Like, the United States has 340 million people, and the Nordic model is more capitalistic. But I would argue that, like, our country it has more of a private sector, even though we're a little bit more regulated. Like, it's hard to explain. Like, the Nordic model has a much more powerful private sector, but it also has like a much huger welfare state. So, like, the differences in, like, any system can't really, like, compare because they're a little bit different, right? But right. Even then, like you make the the point. Okay, well, maybe we're not 100% capitalism, but we're pretty, like you said, close to that capitalistic model. And if you look at, like, what the private sector has done, the standard of living and everything, it makes no sense that socialists make these arguments. Like, you have Second Thought, you have Vosh.
So I don't want to spend too much time on socialist content creators. Don't make sense. I want to reframe and refocus on, which we can talk about that totally. But I want to at least in the beginning, I want to refocus this, who you are and why you're talking to me, and, like, what your journey is and why you have questions and what those questions are.
Well, like I said, my name is D'Angel. Like I said, I've been to college, I worked, and like I said, my journey was, like, left-leaning, and then as I got older and, researched more things, and, like, because, like, I'm an artist, like, I try to do filmmaking and stuff like that. Like, right now I'm kind of, like, going through something and everything, so I don't want you to think, oh, here's a lazy guy that just wants to do things. And, like, I was just this
clearly you're a hard worker that's participating in the writer Screen Actors Guild boycotts and whatever the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, that's different. And, like, I just had, like, more, like, questions, because I was like, man, I had a friend who kind of explained to me what the government does and how it hinders the private sector and how it creates monopolies. And then that led me down to more research, and it's like realizing what libertarians say is true, but then I have questions of, like, how would an ANCAP society work? Because I definitely want to utilize this in my artwork, in my media, to kind of help spread this message. Because, like, at the end of the day, our economic system is getting a little bit worse because corporations are using government to knock down the competition and monopolize themselves. And I think that people don't realize that the state is doing this.
Yeah, there's a joke we've had on this channel ever since it happened to me, right? So you're pretty new, so you wouldn't know. When I first started, Mark, the co-host, was a full-blown anarcho-capitalist. And I was still a night watchman state minarchist, right? And because I just didn't foresee a way in which the court system would work. I felt the state needed a monopoly on the court, foreign treaties, etc., just from a pragmatic perspective. And I read Chaos Theory by Robert Murphy, and I became an ANCAP. That book was the final nail in the coffin. I was like, no, fuck all of this, right? And so there's a bit of a joke there, which is, what's the difference between a minarchist and an anarcho-capitalist? About 6 months, right? It's like when you have, I don't want to call it deprogramming, right? But there are a lot of things that people take for granted to be true that they haven't really picked apart, right? and even some of them will topple years later. Like today, I can't. I had an aha moment. I'll give you an example, right? So you can kind of understand that I'm not like talking shit on you for being a newbie or something, but I'm genuinely saying that this is a process of almost like deprogramming yourself from 32 years of propaganda that I've lived, right?
Yeah.
And I got to stop saying right so much. Something I got to work on. So I was thinking today about so many of the justifications of status will say, well, you need a government because people are retarded. And a lot of ANCAPs, newbie ANCAPs, will be like, no, you don't. And it's like, no, you do. People are retarded and you need governance. And so they'll use this understanding of like, well, the market provides, the free market and a free people will provide exactly what it is that people value. And sometimes people's values are simply wrong for their own long term, right? They are high time preference seeking actors that don't plan for things, or there's a free rider problem. There's all of these issues that governments step in and solve. All of this is true. The problem is that the state uses the necessity for ordered structures and meritocracy and low time preference intelligent people dictating to others what they should and shouldn't be doing as a means of proving that the state's existence is justified. When in fact, anarchy is order, government is civil war. Bell Guru was wrong. It should have been the state is civil war. And what I mean by that is, yeah, insurance companies are a form of governance, right? Policing and taxing and local, covenant communities, all of these are forms of governance, but they're voluntary. And because they're voluntary, it is actually the true conservative notion of order and hierarchical structure that is being co-opted by the state with its elections and its corruption and its nepotism of putting friends on the board and its inefficiencies and its failure to look at the market and all of the problems that it comes with it, saying, well, you need a government, therefore that justifies us. And it's like, no, Geico's a better government than you. And I'd much rather freely choose between Geico and Nationwide as an insurance provider to determine what I need to do in the event that something happens to my shop than the United States government, because you guys suck at this. And they use it as a shield. And so many statists will say, well, government is so important. Like you can't get rid of government. And like I said, baby ANCAPs and anarchists will say, well, actually, you don't need a government. The right answer is, yes, you need a government. And the United States government and states that force you upon this do not provide you a government that works. Instead, they provide you one that is corrupt and doesn't work.
Well, yeah, like I said, I agree that like no matter what, like that's why like anarchy cannot exist in its pure form. Like what is anarchy? No government, no ruler. Like you're gonna have to like. No,
you added that.
Well, say what?
You added the idea of like no government.
Oh no ruler, right?
Yeah, anarchy, no rulers, right? Like ruler. Right. So anarchy originally was an insult that meant anyone against the monarchy in like 1400s England, right? So the first usage of the term anarchist or anarchy basically means that you are against the king having absolute dominion over everyone. Then Proudhon takes the word and makes it like this anti-state thing. And it has many different definitions there. But when you're talking to an anarchist of a voluntarist right-wing variety, or even like a mutualist, it doesn't mean no government, right? Like voluntary governments that I've described are perfectly fine. It just means that no one gets a final say that says, do what I want you to do, or else I'll come and beat you and throw you in prison.
Yeah. Well, I think like left-wing anarchists, libertarian socialists, which makes no sense. I think they view like ANCAPs because they view capitalism as like a power level, like a class hierarchy, like the CEO or like the owner of the corporation, he's at top, he's like a private ruler, like, you know what I mean? So I guess but I would argue that like even because like I said, Vosh is like a libertarian socialist. Like I said, I would argue that socialism always requires a government. Because even if you had social ownership, it's like you would need somebody to organize and maintain that. And I guess
the inconsistency of fools like Bosch is like not something I'm particularly concerned about as anything other than bad metric for a form of anarchism that I don't believe. Right? Like Vosh is an idiot. He can be an idiot by himself. And I don't necessarily want to be so focused on the arguments of like libertarian socialists, right? Like there's a reason it died with de Jacques and it only came back after Rothbard brought back the term libertarianism because it pissed off lefties, right? Like it's not even a real form of anarchism as far as I'm concerned. It's just it's a resurrection of something that was just a leftist anarchist position. As a means of fighting back against the fact that voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism put forward a philosophy that is grounded all the way to the very core of logic and is both morally and legally consistent throughout its entirety as a superior form of anarchism to everything else. And I don't care what the cowards like Bosch that are too afraid to debate me have to say about it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to deviate or put bad. I'm just saying.
No, for sure. I'm just saying, fuck Bosch. She's wrong. This is a TLDR.
Like, because I'm having like questions and answers. It's like, well, I guess you could say, well, and I'm not saying I agree with this. You could say, well, capitalism requires a state, but then it requires like the smallest state as minimal possible. And then I'm trying to argue, like, no matter what hypothetical situation, it's like you put socialism. It's like, yeah, it requires a big central government or state to dominate society.
So what I would say is that Noam Chomsky tried to make a definition in his On Anarchy in 1970. Tried to make a definition that like made sense to people because we're using a lot of words and different camps are using the words differently, right? Yeah. And what he tried to basically say was that like anarchism is against unjustified hierarchies, right? Which is to say that those hierarchical structures are not justified by like the voluntary will of people, etc. And so the left would say that, if it's against the majority, then it is an unjustified hierarchy. And people like voluntarists would say, well, if it's imposing, if it's coercing people, then it's unjustified. But if it's not coercive, then it's perfectly fine to have a hierarchy, right? And they would say, many of the leftist anarchists would say, well, no hierarchy is justified. It's like, okay, well, parents are a hierarchy. That's obviously justified unless you're anti-dad, right? Like, or even just, a hierarchy, voluntary hierarchies exist. Liquid Zulu uses a famous example, famous at least in ANCAP, nerd circles, of a tennis instructor, right? Like if you go to a tennis instructor, you have voluntarily chosen to have someone teach you tennis that is above and beyond you in the knowledge of tennis. And within this domain, you recognize their authority as like a...
Yeah.
The wind is like cutting the green screen weird with my... Right, but you recognize the authority of someone in that domain. And so you don't need a state in order to have capitalism. Capitalism requires private property and requires the protection of private property. Now, the state, the left would say, well, that in and of itself is violence and all this other bullshit. Fuck them. They're wrong. They're stupid. They're just commies when you drill down to it, and they're wrong. But the right would say, well, you need this big central authority to protect it or else it isn't real. And it's like, well, it doesn't need to be I see no reason why, because historically it has been for most of time. Why moving forward, it must be an imposed figure, power that demands private property that they define against its citizens. Like it doesn't need to be that. It can be a voluntary system of governments and contracts and mutual agreements between people and defensive pacts, etc. Like there's just like,
Well,
I think it is, yeah, it's just a silly notion.
well, you like I said, because I'm asking questions, I want to because
Yeah, that's fine.
because,
Go ahead.
because when I tell people this, like, because like I agree that we need to go back to like a pure like free market. Like, I mean, I think, like I said, in ANCAP society, like I've stated before, at this current moment, at this current political turn, like maybe in like the far future when we solve like, you know, poverty, every country's like first world, like we're not going to solve all of poverty or anything, but like I think Mentis Wave said is like, and like I know it's science fiction, it's like when we're traveling amongst the stars, we'll have like ANCAP like societies, like private mining colonies, space colonies out there, you know what I mean? Like it because it'd be so technically logically advanced, like that be able to like do those things. But for now, like I could argue that like most things, even in our regulated capitalist system, I agree that most things can be privatized. And if we
Everything
go
can.
back to say what?
I said everything can be. Everything should
Everything. Yeah, everything can, but at the moment, I think that because most people are stated, it's like, whoa, we can't. But I think that like if you convince people, like, okay, most things can be privatized, and then you said everything can be privatized, and the whole thing is that like, because when you come to like a free market, we don't have cronyism, you don't have bailouts, subsidies, the government coming in favoring companies and starting these monopolies, and you're allowed to have companies fall. You're not going to have these giant corporations as they are. I think that people see the free market and be like, well, without government intervention, corporations will get big. But only with a pure free market, corporations would have to rely on profit. Like, how are they going to get big?
So I'm not sure what your question here is. What's your question? Like, there's a lot of things I could say about what you said, but like, what seems to be your cause, your concern, your question?
Like with
your soul.
with the narco capitalism, it's like my big thing is like, what's stopping a company becoming like a private central government in itself? Like what's stopping like buying out all these, like, yeah, you would have competition. What's stopping like all these like companies buying out and becoming like a monopoly or like huge among itself? And then, having an army and then bailing down your house like a Jeff Bezos type of thing, because
warlordism, this is what it's referred to.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a pretty standard question. It's one that every ANCAP ought to be able to answer, because, you know, it's one of the meme questions. And I don't mean to say that it's a meme because you're saying it. I just mean that it's like a question you get very often, right? When people are first discovering who you are and like what you think. They're like, what the fuck? Well, what stops McDonald's from taking over? So there's a couple of things. One of them you kind of already hinted at, right? Which is that it's the state that grants true monopolies, right? Like, yeah. So like when a majority of the market share is held by a company, you investigate why that exists, more often than not, it's the state's involvement. So when we look at AT&T, we recognize in 1934 that the state monopolized the entire telecommunications industry and nationalized it, and then gave it to a private company known as AT&T, and then they split it up and created Verizon, etc. Right? So there's that, right? Or we look at like the railway companies, we can recognize that it was the state that was giving plots of land, massive plots of land, to the railroad companies to incentivize them to build railroads out west, because that's what the state wanted. So they were controlling giving away private property that they didn't have a right to give away to railway companies to build up all of these towns, etc. More often than not, it's the state. But then we have another example where it's not really the state's involvement. And that would be the biggest monopoly we've ever had, which is Standard Oil. Right? And then what we find is that once we actually investigate Standard Oil, all of the things that the left historians like to say Standard Oil did, they didn't really do. And if they did do it, it was really unsuccessful and they quit doing it. So they'll give you an example and they'll be like, look at how Standard Oil would buy up all the competition, right? And then once they bought up all the competition, they could raise the rates. And so they did that. Standard Oil did do that. Bad Standard Oil. Right? And you know what happened? People started building factories with no intention of producing kerosene just to get bought out by Standard Oil. And so, like, it actually caused more people to enter the market to raise rates. And eventually they just had to stop, right? The reason that Standard Oil was a monopoly was because it was an efficiency monopoly. And so they brought, during Standard Oil's time, they brought down the price of kerosene from about $25 a barrel to about $4 a barrel because of new manufacturing techniques, new accounting techniques, new waste disposal with like the byproducts and turning them into like new forms of plastics and things like that, right? It was an amazing company. And eventually they were broken apart by the U.S. government and the Supreme Court. And Standard Oil was already in the process of collapsing 2 years before that anyways, and the government never needed to do anything. But they did something purely for a symbolic victory. But it was actually the market economy that broke apart that monopoly, not the United States government. So what's to stop Standard Oil from recognizing that their reign will be short-lived, right? And so because of that, they need to take over Pullman Town, right? See, the thing is that if you live in kind of an anarchist society, you really only can imagine the real world in scenario A or scenario B, right? In scenario A, the more likely one, you have an anarchist community like Prospera in Honduras, right? Where a company goes to Honduras and attempts to set it up and uses kind of legal loopholes so that they can purchase property in Honduras and set up a voluntarist community that exists in Honduras right now. That's gotten way bigger, where they have multiple different insurance companies and you get to choose your insurance for your companies. And some biotech firms are moving out there because it's base as fuck and it's voluntarism in action. But it's surrounded by governments. And so McDonald's Inc. doesn't really get to come in and invade Prospera, because it would have to invade Honduras. So that's scenario A. So in scenario A, this is not a problem. So what we're really thinking about is scenario B, right? Which is 1,000 Liechtensteins, right? Which is to say there's little city-states and covenant communities and neighborhoods and individuals living out on their own, kind of all spread out. And at least for like, thousands and thousands of miles, hey, your phone is like, call your notification sound down.
Yeah.
It's chill. It's chill. I know somebody's going to be watching this and be like, what the fuck, my phone go off? Somebody's got the default fucking setting. But anyways, so in 1,000 Liechtensteins, right, where no other government can invade, right? What you're talking about is scenario B, 1,000 Liechtensteins. Company A wants to invade town B, Covenant Community B, because Covenant Community B has no real power, no military to speak of. They have a couple cops, from their little Covenant community and shit, and like it's just land for the taking, and workers for the taking, for slaves. Let's set up the new warlord. Who's going to stop us, right? Because what stops us now is, the FBI or the ATF. If they don't, if they're not too busy killing dogs, we'll stop killing dogs and stop McDonald's Inc. from taking over, a little town in Texas and capturing their slaves, right?
Yeah.
And so what's to stop them in scenario B? Well, there's kind of two answers. The first answer is I don't know and I don't care, because our current situation is a violation of human rights. And at least under scenario B, human rights violations are not caked into the situation. And so therefore we must choose scenario B because it is the one that has a possibility of no human rights violations, while our current status quo does. That's the short answer, and it's the right answer, right? But nobody is convinced by an answer that just says, go fuck yourself, get wrecked. McDonald's is taking over like it's the fucking Edo period in South Carolina, right? Nobody wants that. So the longer answer is that in 1,000 Liechtenstein scenario, you may be able to take over a company town. But now you have become a warlord, and you have signified to everyone else around you that you don't follow the nap, and that you're a warlord, and that you steal, murder, rob, enslave people in order to get what you want, right? So now that means every insurance company is going to drop you, except for your own insurance, right? And there's likely going to be boycotts on any product or anything associated with you. And many companies will refuse to do any business with anybody that does any business with you, right? And so you've isolated yourself from the economy, from everyone around you immediately, instantaneously. Everything just got more expensive. Everything just went against your interest. And on top of that, there are security firms. And because there are security firms, there are people whose job it is to stop this shit, or to, do SWAT teams against terrorists, or potentially, they're Blackwater, right? They're a mercenary corps. So instead of the United States government giving money to Ukraine, maybe Ukraine hires one of these anarchist fucking groups that, has Scud missiles and all kinds of cool shit and badass. So there are professional militaries that exist, right? And they see this and they go, just wait. And they're waiting for someone to say, hey, my house was destroyed and taken over by McDonald's Inc. And they killed my wife and my children, and I was able to narrowly escape. I demand restitution. And McDonald's Inc., they go, well, fuck you and your courts. I don't submit to any of you. I don't care about your arbitrating firms. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. So now Blackwater, who loves to kill people and loves to get paid to kill people, has carte blanche from a dude to go back and demand restitution via violence. And so McDonald's has not only economically shut themselves out from 1,000 Liechtensteins, they've also invited mercenary groups and police agencies and lawyers like a fucking, like they're a corpse. McDonald's has made themselves a walking corpse to be picked apart by the vultures that are all of the lawyers that have cases against their property now from clients that were fucked, and all of the police agencies and mercenary groups that now have an excuse to go do what they do best, which is kill motherfuckers that get out of line. And so, there is this idea that, like I said, there's always a possibility that nothing happens, that McDonald's just takes over, right? But just because scenario B could end in disaster, it could be a problem that violates human rights. That's just the nature of reality in the world we live in. And the status quo is definitionally a violation of human rights. And so I want to get rid of the baked in human rights violations and try and find systems with the least amount of conflict, and the least amount of human rights violations. But evil people will always exist no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds interesting, but then then I can only see a scenario where a lot of people want to go back to the status quo. I know that the system won't be perfect, but then okay, I can understand that scenario. But it's let's say we're in a country, it becomes anarcho-cap, it becomes ANCAP, right? Mm-hmm. And it's war is expensive, so we're not going to go to war with any other country. But what happens when a country invades us? We're going to have to do something. Right.
So I'll give you an example of this. So I have an entire video on YouTube about this, right? How does anarchism defend itself? And so the first thing I notice is, is kind of like the old age, kind of like when goods cross borders, soldiers don't. Which the Ukraine war is actually one of the first examples, major examples of trading partners going to war. Pretty rare, right? It's pretty rare that people do that. So because there's economic entanglement, it becomes expensive for someone to go to war with you if you're a trading partner, right? Because that trade cuts off. So it's not just the cost of the war, but it's also the economic costs of those. So there's that. And there's standing militias. There's ways to protect yourself. But the right answer, I would say, is that just like now you have retainers for lawyers, you would have retainers for security services, right? You'd pay a small amount of money, right, for for the access to a highly elite fighting force, right? And the highly elite fighting force doesn't live in your fucking town, right? They live 200 miles away or 1,000 miles away. And just like firefighters that sit at a fire department don't live as your next door neighbor, right? They sit at a firehouse, and in the event of a fire breaks out, right? Whoever's awake at the time, the alarm bells ring off, they go down the chutes, they hop in the fire truck, and they go put out a fire. In the event of like some type of invasion from a country, some company like Blackwater that you pay a very small amount of money for, because everybody's paying a small amount of money in the event that an emergency happens, they'll show up. They hop in the fucking helicopters and they fucking book it 150 miles to where you at, and they drop a fucking small group of Navy SEALs to come and fight. Now you might think, well, how's that going to stop the fucking China from invading, right? Well, China doesn't just invade one day, right? Like countries don't just like overnight fucking Pearl Harbor you, right? We knew Pearl Harbor was coming. There was a world war going on. There was empires fighting each other. There was a lot of information that, we had that we didn't share because we really wanted to go to war. So we let Pearl Harbor happen, right? There's all of this shit. So the same is true, which is that in the event that another party wants to invade, there will be a lot of information, and the market will accurately showcase that information. Security services that are in the know, that buy intelligence, start charging people more money. People will be like, why are they charging more? Maybe I should get more serious about my own security. As the rates go up, it becomes more profitable. As it becomes more profitable, other companies might start security services at a cheaper cost, so that there's increased security. Like the market can actually handle a standing army based off of the needs of the people. And yes, it can take 10 years for an army, a fighting force, to be really truly effective and amazing. But like, there will always be those small units of badasses, and then the reserve troops in our own military suck. Anybody that's been in the United States Army will know that there's a bunch of doofus fucking retards that are just there to support the people that actually do shit, right? And so there's no reason that private militaries and security services wouldn't act in the same way. However, the price system and the market system will provide the best quality soldiers, as well as the appropriate amount of soldiers to defend our property that is necessary without wasting money like it's currently being wasted, spending billions of dollars to research fucking new airplanes that just get sent to Israel because we don't know what to do with them.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, okay, let's move on to private police, right? Because like I said, I'm all.
If you want to respond to all that, like first, like go ahead. I'll sit it out. Wait a little while. I don't want you to feel any type of way.
No, like when it comes to private police, yeah, I can see the benefit for like, because now you have like the barriers are down. This is a narco-capitalist society. Like anybody can compete. You have different competing police services and businesses, and then people sign up. Like they're gonna give you the best service. This is for profit. It's like they're not gonna mess up for profit. But then the argument is say, well, if you can't afford the police, you would get your own gun. You would create your own like militia. But even with the private police, is like, okay, maybe like you could say the private police won't harass.
Pause.
But
just real quick, who are these poor, destitute landlords you speak? There's this weird thing where it's like people can't afford police, and therefore they'll get a gun themselves to try and protect themselves, and they'll be out of the ability to afford police. Like they'll be priced out of the market from policing. And the thing that sounds really weird to me. And the reason that sounds really weird to me is that like if you're too poor to like purchase insurance that like includes some policing, right, for your property, you probably don't own property. You're probably renting property. And if you're renting property, that means you have a landlord. And your landlord is going to charge rent based off of the need to hire security so that his property is protected. So it's like this idea of like people won't be able to afford police. You're talking about a very, very small amount of people that own property and live in the property they own, but are too poor to pay for insurance for the property. It's a very, very, and also, or too defiant to do so, and instead choose a very large risk. It's an incredibly small amount of people, but in our heads, when we don't think about it, we just go, well, some people can't afford things. And since we can't afford things, some people will be priced out. And logically, that's true, but we're talking about less than 1% of people, because the people that can't afford that will likely be renting, and it'll be their landlord that pays for it.
Yeah. Well, the whole point is that, like, okay, with private police, okay, because I'm trying to envision all types of scenarios, because you gotta be realistic, and so. But with the police, it's okay. With our regular police, right? Police can harass, they can perform racism, they can do all this corrupt stuff, and then you can make an argument. Okay, with privatized police, is like, well, they're not going to do anything to, mess up with the customer, and then you have other services, and they'll have to compete. But then, like,
I'll bite that bullet. There might be super racist cops in a super racist town that are super unfair, and like the crime might even be that both the police and the town support like no blacks allowed, and like when blacks show up, they just get the shit kicked out of them. Now, at a certain point, the inability to know that you're not supposed to be, like, if you don't know that it's a sundown town, right, and nobody tells you, well, then you have a problem, right? Because someone else can come in and correct that because you're an aggressor. But if it says blacks get the shit kicked out of them if you cross this threshold, and then you cross this threshold and you darker than a motherfucker, like, I don't know what to tell you. You know what I mean? Like, you went to White Town and you got kicked. Like, what are you doing in White Town?
But also, that's not how sometimes racism works, right? Sometimes you could just be not in some downtown, and you'd be like, okay, you did a petty crime, you didn't do nothing, and then some racist or prejudice police kick the shit out of you and killed you, whatever. There's so many like in one hand, okay, you have private police services, like different communities, different people that can like maybe do an efficient job, but then like, because right now you have companies that will cause loopholes to sell the products for profit. Like there are companies that will sell you a bad product. If they can sell you a bad product, like they'll profit. Then it's like, well, when police is like, you could have, like, even our regular police, it's like sometimes you have police that don't do a good job at investigations. You could have just...
Let's pick that apart a little bit, right? So cops could do a racism just because they're biased and bad. Totally agree, right? The point of a market-based system of policing is that it will be more efficient and better. That doesn't mean it will be great. That doesn't mean that racists won't exist and that some of them won't be cops. If they're aggressing upon people and violating their rights because of the color of their skin, and that's going to be a net cost to the whatever institution or company sets forward this policing system. And so racism costs money. And so the only way you get racism as a standard, right, as opposed to, when I say a standard, I mean like as something that exists across the board or in a large proportion. The only way you get that as a standard is if people are willing to pay that price because they want racism. That could happen. Like I said, in White Town, where only the whites live, they're willing to incur the additional cost of racism because they value cops being racist in their town. And if that's what those people want in that town, whatever, don't go to that town if you're black. Actually, don't go to that town if you're white anyways, because the sandwiches probably have too much mayonnaise. but it's probably not a cool town to go to. But so yes, racism will exist. Racists will exist. Bad people will exist. But it is the system. It is a market system that will weed out that racism. Our current system doesn't do that at all, in any way, shape, form, or capacity, because cops don't have a duty to protect. Cops can't be sued. Only the state can be sued. And when the state is sued, they go to their insurance company, and then the insurance company charges more rates based off of how often something occurs. And the way that towns and cities deal with these increased rates is by increasing your taxes. So the long and short of it is even if you do successfully sue a police officer or a police station, all that happens is you raised everybody's fucking taxes. At the end of the day, they're not really punished unless they're really, really, really bad. Then they get punished, but more often than not, shit gets swept under the rug. And it's a system that is entirely corrupt because it's not a market system, because it is an imposed system with no competition. And it is the competitive system that will be more efficient and less racist, unless you want racism. Now, there was another really interesting thing that you said, and so that's point one. Point two, the other interesting thing that you said was, well, as of right now, you have people that will find loopholes to sell you a bad product for profit. I totally agree. That's absolutely the thing. It's one of two things when this occurs. Number one, it's fraud, and that's a form of aggression. When you lie to people and you present a contract that is not valid because what is put into the contract is not true, then you have violated the voluntary agreement, and you violated that voluntary cooperation. And because of that, I need all of my money back. I need to be restored to whatever the terms of the restitution is that we agree upon, because you violated that contract. Or if it's not fraud and it's just a shitty product that doesn't really work that well in the long term, then that's just high time preference. And sometimes high time preference things are good, right? We tend to think of high time preference as, we tend to think of high time preference as always bad. And people will say things like, oh, they don't make them like they used to. You used to be able to buy a toaster. It lasted you your entire life. Now you buy a toaster or a microwave, and when you move, it's broken. It's like, yeah, but if you adjust for inflation, toasters used to cost like $1,300, dude. Like, yeah. It's okay that we make shitty toasters that break now because they're $20 fucking. And so yeah, people might make shitty products that don't work that well for a short period of time before people get better things. But that might just be because people prefer a $20 toaster that breaks in a year versus a $1,300 toaster that lasts a whole lifetime that they can pass on to their children in the will. And so those would be my two kind of points there.
Okay. Well, okay, we're gonna go back to we go back to the police thing, and then we go back to the law thing, right? Like I said, everything's privatized. Like, you have different law companies. Like, how do we be on a single? Because there's no central, nothing is centralized. Everything is decentralized. How do we agree on a more base law besides the non-aggression principle?
Oh yeah, there's gonna be tons of gray area. Like, what is stalking? Is stalking even a form of aggression? I didn't touch you. I didn't interact with your property in any way, shape, or form. I just got real fucking close to you all over and over and over again. Some people are going to argue, well, that's not a violation of the non-aggression principle because technically I haven't harmed your property. I haven't damaged anything. The only thing I've done is made you scared, but your feelings are not my fucking fault. I can't be responsible because of your feelings, because the natural kind of progression of that would be insanity, right? It would be like if a Black Lives Matter person is offended, then I owe them money. That can't be a definition of an aggressive act. And then some people, like Stephan Kinsella, will argue that, there's a more pragmatic understanding of what occurs from the development of common law within society. Because there will be laws that emerge that basically everybody follows, even though they're not necessarily the non-aggression principle. So, for example, an anti-stalking law will probably be something that will be endorsed by every major rights enforcement agency that exists. Okay? So, you hire a rights enforcement agency to protect your rights, or your covenant community hires an insurance provider to do that for like your town, right? Or your town might be separate from them and have its own system of rules, and you better know what those rules are when you come to town. A lot of different variations, but a fuck ton of people are going to pay for. They don't want to worry about all these fucking laws. They don't want to worry about property damages or anything like that. You know, they're not lawyers. They're not cops. They just want to go about their day-to-day fucking life, not fucking with people, and go to work and like own property and have a family and invest in the future and do the shit normal people do, right? So they hire Nationwide or Geico or whatever. And Nationwide and Geico will say, hey, there's a moral clause. You have to do these things, okay? Stalking's out. Cyber stalking's out. Doxing people's out. A lot of these great... Getting binoculars so that you can take telescopic photos of like people in their backyard, you know, sunbathing behind their privacy fence. Yeah, that's out. There will be things that aren't technically violations of the non-aggression principle that all of the major companies will adopt simply because they're a good idea for a cohesive society to follow these rules. And then there will be holdouts, weirdos that live in the fucking mountains, like, I don't know, nudist colony, right? There will be a nudist colony that lives out in the mountains. There's nothing wrong with the nudist colony. And there's nothing wrong with the weirdos fucking walking around with half-chubbed hard-ons and like grandma titties flapping in the wind. Have at it, man. The hot springs are a natural place for healing for grandpa and grandma to go where they like to be buck-ass naked. And they're weird and they go live in their area. And sometimes people visit their area. And so they might not be playing by the same set of rules in their weird little town. But everybody else is kind of under the assumption that, like, you don't walk around with your dick out at the park. And so even if the park is privately owned and, like, there's no rule that says you can't have your dick out, everyone's going to kind of agree no dicks at the park. And so there are laws that will emerge because they are in a market system of market legal system. And they're laws that kind of most people want. And it's the kind of society most people want to live in. And then there will be individual communities that are much smaller, like the fucking weirdo nudists or the HOAs in a neighborhood that say no loud music. There probably won't be a no loud music law across the land. But in the white picket fence little neighborhoods where they want to keep a very nice neighborhood, their HOA might have a contractual agreement of no loud music. And so what this means is that there are a ton of laws that are gray areas, and most people will adopt them because that's what most people want. But you will have the freedom to live in a neighborhood or live in a community that doesn't have those laws, as opposed to 80% of people agree that being naked is bad. Therefore, there's an anti-nudist law, and the state of Virginia says you're not allowed to be nude anywhere. And the question is why in the middle of the fucking mountains of Virginia must it be illegal that I not be nude because Karens and normal people in the fucking suburbs have this rule? It makes no fucking sense for me. That's what a market system of law looks like. It looks like individual communities adopting the things that make sense and the market adopting those things. And there'll probably be phone apps and shit, just like you have Google Maps to avoid tolls on highways. There'll be like alerts when your fucking GPS goes into a weird town you've never been to. It's like, hey man, don't chew bubblegum in this town. Like it's disrespectful. People really don't like it. You might get fined. And then it's just gonna work. It'll be fine.
Okay, well, I mean, then that opens up to the area. Okay, maybe people will agree, and then somebody else can go create their own area and everything. But then there's certain areas that are not great, like the abuse of children, right? Like let's say, which I hate, right? Like let's say like I create my own community, we create the laws, we can abuse children here, right? Like,
well, that's not pause.
Well,
pause. That's just a violation of the non-aggression principle. That's not like an opinion.
But the thing is that like everything, that's what I'm saying, in capsule, everything is privatized, maybe privatized, right? Like in this society, they could just say, hey, we create a law like we're gonna abuse children. Like
now Blackwater's coming in. Right? Like because you have children, right? And children are incapable of consent. And so what you're saying is you have adults, you have emergent adults, children that have not quite yet reached the age of maturity, that have a human right to their own bodily autonomy, and a society has decided they're going to, as a system of legality, they're going to create anti-legalism, right? It's a contradiction in and of itself. They're going to, as a legal system, they're going to violate the non-aggression principle by violating the rights of children that are incapable of fighting back yet. And so I, as a parent, as a concerned person, can take up the legal case of those children on their behalf, if I so choose, and say, fuck these people, we're getting the children out of there. And if they fight back and they refuse to go to any form of arbitration, we'll do what's necessary to get those children. And at a certain point, that might mean killing some motherfuckers to get the children. And if they're fighting back actively, then, they fucking deserved it. So that's just it's a very different thing. What that won't occur in, right, is the things that people can't agree are aggressive. And you can't really prove our aggression, like I said. And so if a majority of people don't want to do something, but a small group of people do want to do something, and it's not hurting anybody, then who are you to be able to go and invade those people? Who are you to stop those people?
Yeah. No, like I said, I'm just asking. Okay. Well, and I'm not even, because I do take that subject very seriously, but not even just like, just sexual, but even physical abuse and stuff like that, because everybody can have like their own like private law that they are subscribed to. Then like,
I'll make it easier for you, right? I will be super fair, because we're not in a debate and I'm really trying to bring you along into the idea. So I'll bite the biggest bullet ever. Not a child abuse place, because we can invade that place and kill all those people if they fight back. Fuck them. They're abusing children. But let's say it's the white woman colony. All right? The white woman colony sets themselves up as the white woman colony. And it's only white women. And what they do is they fuck dogs. And everyone in the town loves dog fucking. All of the dog fucking porn comes from white woman colony. White woman colony makes a lot of money selling dog fucking videos on the internet, because everywhere else in all around the other areas, that shit's banned. Because like, remember how I said morally gray shit? Like people are going to be like, go fuck yourself. It violates everybody's moral clause in their insurance companies, but White Woman Colony doesn't give a fuck. They got their own insurance company. They got their own money, and they're making a lot of fucking money from dudes that are fucking getting the OnlyFans or not OnlyFans, onlydogs.com subscriptions to White Woman Colony. And so there's a whole town of dog fuckers. They're degenerates, and they're sick, and they're disgusting, and they're likely abusing animals in really weird ways. I want to go in there and murder all those people, but I don't really have the right to do so. And as much as that's the bullet that I have to bite as the anarchist, is to say that because I can't prove White Woman Colony is inherently evil and destructive and violating rights, human rights, because the dogs really are just property. There's not a whole lot I can do. What I have to do instead is boycottonlydogs.com, and I have to petition Geico and Nationwide to add that to their moral clause that like they'll drop any client that's discovered purchasing a subscription from onlydogs.com. And there are ways that I can use the power of money and corporations to try and curtail the behavior of other people. And I absolutely will use that. And it's not coercion as the communists think when people utilize their own resources and power to try and stop you from doing what you want to do, because it's so abhorrent that like a majority of people can find a way to ostracize you in such a degree, both financially and whatever. But eventually there's a certain threshold where some people are going to value dog fucking videos to such a degree they'll do whatever it takes to get dog fucking videos. And there will be some people that value getting fucked by Red Rocket, you know, so much that they'll be willing to put up with anything in order to do it. And the only answer to that is those people don't get to come to our town. And it sucks that those people exist. And in a nation state, we'd lock those people in a cage. And I think a lot of people naturally like that. They like the idea that that person goes into a cage because it's gross and disgusting and they want no part of it. But at the end of the day, you don't get to put people in a cage just because they're gross and disgusting and you want no part of it.
Well, I think the argument is, I think the argument is because they're violating something that is perceived as wrong, as a violation of something that is normal, or they're doing something that is violating humans. Like for example, I know that like libertarians, I know you,
only
like,
themselves.
Themselves.
The dog. Yeah, White Woman Colony is only doing damage to themselves voluntarily and to dogs. I don't get to stop them.
Like, for example, in this system that we have, this status system, like, you know, I think I've heard it from you, like, or other libertarians, that they should legalize all drugs, right? And I can make the argument is like, if you make something legally available, people won't do it, or people have a right to abuse their bodies and pleasure themselves, right? But then, like, you legalize heroin, crack, cocaine, all that, right? And then it's all legal, right?
Yeah.
And then let's say hypothetically, not everybody's buying and getting drugs, right? And then some little kid comes in and, like, you know, experiments with it or has some type of contact with it. Now you're violating someone that doesn't have consent, right? Like there is that like gray area, because like I said, I want to be convinced of this ANCAP society, because
so two things.
Like right now, like what I see economically and what we've been doing for like a long time as a country has not worked. It's been led to like destructiveness, right? It's been led to me trying to do economically grow. Like, it's been affecting people's lives. And then when you like, I think libertarians point out these right things. I think that, like, in an ANCAP society, it would be one of the most financially rich, successful societies, but then you're getting into these moral areas. And I'm not saying everything's going to be like perfect, but the whole point is that, like, for this to happen, we need a good amount of people really to be close to, or try to, with ANCAP, or privatize everything or something, on board. Because people have, like, in general, I talk to and everything, people have these perceptions about corporations, that they're evil, that this and that. And learning more what the government does, it's just mind-boggling that the government can do a lot of evil, and then people pass it, well, we can fix government, we can elect this, but it's just all the same, right? Like, I don't think that voting never helps, because every person that's put into office does the status quo, does the same thing. And like I said, like, yeah, you're right, everybody will be able to do their own thing unless it violates, you know, aggression and all that. But then we're talking about, like, the dog situation. Is like, well, in this, like, what's stopping from these people boycotting and tearing this civilization down? And when, like, let's go back to the status quo, because
there's a bunch of stuff in there. So we talk about drug legalization, and we talk about corporations as evil. We talked about what do we do from the breakdowns to three things. So there's an interesting layer that you have that I think is a very true intuition you're picking up on, which is that anarcho-capitalism doesn't work unless everybody believes in it, or at the very least enough people believe in it, and then like another large group of people don't have this deep desire to go against it. They'll maintain the status quo once they're living in it, and like the nudges of the current legal system will get them to behave appropriately, right? And you're right. So what does that mean? So the first thing that means is, number one, 1,000 Liechtensteins, right? You're going to have to live in a community that you want, or you're going to have to live in a community with a system of rules that you prefer. Prospera in Honduras is a great example of this. When you go there, you can choose from multiple different insurance plans of like what system of laws you want to fucking follow. And based upon what laws you're following depends upon your risk as an individual. And if you're willing to follow more laws and behavior, such as like not doing drugs, you can get a lower insurance rate because you're less risk as a client, which is very interesting. So you might have multiple systems of legal systems within your own framework. Very interesting. But moving aside from all of that, the major problem with legalizing drugs is that we don't have private property in this country. So I'm all for drug legalization, but it's going to cause problems. And that's okay. Kind of break a few eggs scenario. It's unfortunate, but the violation of human rights by not having them legalized is a default wrong. One of the problems is that you don't get to exclude people the way that you should be able to exclude people, because public property can't exclude people unless they're violating the law, right? So if you have a public park, for example, and you legalize heroin in your town, the public park doesn't get to then say, well, heroin's legal, but like, I'm not in the park, I mean, you can, but you start to run into problems like this, right? Where I, as a business owner, ought to be able to discriminate against people that walk in that look smelly and look sleepy. If heroin's legal in my town, then I ought to be able to say, that dude looks like he nods off. Get the fuck out of my store. I don't like you. Instead, we live in this society where there's the civil rights laws and all these other things where you're likely to face a big lawsuit for discrimination based upon these other characteristics that you might not even be discriminating against, because we haven't enshrined the right of discrimination as a legal system. You should be able to say no Irish need apply. You should be able to say no blacks. Just like you should be able to say, I don't like the way you look. Get the fuck out of my store. You look ugly. Or you look like you might be a heroin addict and you're going to nod off. Fuck off. You don't get to use my bathroom. But because there's this legal system that protects us, protects people like that from being discriminated against, even if it's not based off of those characteristics, we still live in a society that's terrified that they will be sued because they were Latino or because they were disabled or you know what I mean, or some shit like that, right? I'm disabled as a heroin addict. Sometimes I nod off, and this is against the Americans Disabilities Act to say that I can't buy donuts at your donut shop, man, right? And so because of this, we don't actually get a society that gets to reject these people. Instead, when we legalize something, we're forcibly integrated with these people because of all of the other legal system settings. And so this is a contradiction of the nation state not giving us full rights as private property owners. And so even if we do legalize drugs, the fallout that occurs from that isn't necessarily the legalization of drugs' fault. It's all of the other shit that is illegal that shouldn't be illegal, like my ability to discriminate against people I don't like coming onto my property. I have another point, but that was a lot, so I want you to be able to respond.
Well, to be fair, because I am Black and Latino, but to be fair, but I do not subscribe to the leftist kind of point of view, like I had before, because it seemed nice, like Black Lives Matter, equality. But then when you actually look and study it, and the reality experiences of life is like, how much racism do we really have in the United States? Like, what is
racism? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's what system versus power. Is it everyday racism? It just you could flip and everything, and then it messes with you, because if you're coming new, like at a very young age, new into that, like then that can really brainwash you, and then you can start to see race and everything. But as far as like these civil rights, like I think that was kind of beneficial for capitalism, right? Like because
the Civil Rights Act needs to be split into two different things, because the Civil Rights Act got rid of legally enforced discrimination, which is the Jim Crow laws. That was the state saying that you as a private property owner must discriminate based on race. That part of the Civil Rights Act, perfect, yeah. Right? There's like, love it. That is giving rights back to the private property owner. The problem is that it comes with its reverse side of a coin, which is that you're not allowed to discriminate against people based upon race. And like, I don't like the idea of discriminating against people based upon race. I don't. I really don't. But there are instances where I can see its value. If I was living in America in a small town, and we began to develop Native American kind of form of Shintoism, right? Where local people that had lived on the land in the area got back to their roots. And then some Birkenstocks wearing white hippie dude, actually worse than that, some fucking like frat boy Logan Paul comes with his camera crew ready to go check out the fucking suicide forest, shows up to my town. I ought to be able to say, yeah, we don't let white people here. This is a thing for us. This is a thing for our culture. This is a thing for our connection with our ancestry. Like, if you want to apply to like do a documentary or something, and you want to like respectfully observe from a distance, you do that. But this is for us, and this is our place, and we made it. Who the fuck am I to say that it's wrong for this Native American tribe of people that are getting back to their roots to say that they don't allow outsiders into this area that they've created for themselves as a spiritual thing that they believe in? I might say it's wacky. I might say, fuck off. But like, I'm supposed to fucking use the state to stop that? Now, granted, most racial discrimination is not that, right? Most racial discrimination is just, I don't like Mexicans. But at the same time, why don't you like Mexicans? I don't know. Is it, maybe they are coming and taking your fucking jobs, right? Like, maybe you do work in a scenario where you want to reduce the influx of a new culture coming into your neighborhood that speaks a different language, that has different customs, and you want to keep your community some form of monogamous culture that you prefer. Why do I have a right? Why do I have the ability to stop you from doing that? I'm part black myself. You wouldn't notice it or see it because my family's Melungeon on my mother's side, and on my dad's side, I don't know how much choice was involved, but like my great grandpa married a slave and got excised from the family. I don't know. That might have just been the best deal she could get. You know what I mean? I'm not saying she really was into it. She might have just been like, freedom sounds nice for some white dick. I'll suck a white dick once a week. It's like, it sounds a lot better than living in the slave quarters. All right. But regardless, I've got black on both ends of my family. So I'm about 12% black. And I like black girls, and I like to date black girls. And I've faced a lot of weird racism, usually directed at her from black people, as like looking at her like a race trait. And so like, if we live in a society where people can discriminate against race, I fully expect someone like me would be discriminated against in certain areas, right? That we would go to like a They might even call it the cookout. And no whites allowed at the cookout unless invited. And the fact that I brought a black woman with me might be all the reason necessary to get disinvited. You know, like, I understand that discrimination against race feels icky and wrong. But like I said, that costs money. And so it just does. And so if you value it, I can't tell you not to value it. Right?
Yeah. Well, like, my whole thing is that, like I said, I'm against, like, who doesn't, like, dislike racism? But my whole thing is that, like, if like a certain group
racists,
like, or certain groups are just coming in for personal reason and they're not violating nothing, and they're like, oh, we don't want you. It's like, I don't care if you're black, white, gay. It's like, okay, I'm fine. But I think when it comes to business, when it comes to, like, sort of more a whole society, especially when it comes to business, then then you're messing with money. Then it's not profitable, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, for example, it was more profitable for the NBA to have more black people in there. Would you agree? The early days of the NBA, they weren't.
Some racism can be good and profitable and prosperous for everyone. I'll explain. If you're an NBA and you're not letting blacks in, right? Like, you're losing money for sure, right? You may not be losing money, but you're certainly losing fucking championships. That's for damn sure, against people that are letting blacks in. But let's say, for example, that I run a law firm in New York City that deals with international Italian contract law. Okay? Super, super, super niche clientele and super, super, super expensive type of service that we offer. Okay? Now, in my law firm, I pretty much exclusively hire people from Italian families and Italians, and I prefer people that are fluent in Italian. Though I don't always hire people that are fluent in Italian. Sometimes I will hire people that only know a little bit of Italian. If they're from an Italian family and they're a goddamn great lawyer, right? And they might work on the American side. Okay, or whatever town, right? Now, let's say I, as a black man, am the greatest contract lawyer world's ever seen. Okay? And I try and get a job here. It's perfectly reasonable for that place to go, dude, you might be a great contract lawyer, but you're fucking useless to us. You're not Italian. If I try and bring you in on these meetings with these other Italians, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. You're not going to get the inside jokes. You're going to make everything more uncomfortable just by you being there because you're different. And we need a clientele that gets the culture, gets the jokes, gets the people, understands what's going on, and can make our clients feel like when they come here, they might as well be in Italy, because that's the space that we've created here. We feel like an extension of their family and their country, and that helps earn trust and profit. And bringing in some random black dude that doesn't know shit about Italians might be a bad idea. And yet, let's say he really is the greatest contract lawyer in the world. Well, they might bring him on to consult. You know what I mean? And he might exist in some capacity at the company, but he's going to be denied certain opportunities because of the color of his skin and his ethnicity and his origin. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it behooves everybody that they discriminate on him based upon the fact that he's a black dude that's not Italian.
Yeah. Well, I agree that, like, when it comes to collective things, kind of like culture, like, I think those things are kind of just inevitable. We have, like I said, I agree that I think, like, culture is only, like, good on a small level, especially like you said. I do agree with that. But I'm talking about, like, I think it's like when it comes to more like over encompass things, like we could talk about sports, media, movies. Like I, these things are also part of culture. And I think like the problem is that like, and I don't want to sound like a nationalist, right? Like I think that culture is only effective regardless of race on a national level. Like, you know what I mean? Like we're all black, white, Latino, but we like American culture is made of different pieces, but it's like American culture. We're all American, right? But then I find it weird that like, oh, only black people like, is black in American
Why?
culture. I don't,
I'm just curious. I'm curious why you think that culture. What do you mean by effective? I'm actually genuinely curious. You said that culture is only effective at a national level. What do you mean by that, and why?
Like what I'm talking about is like I think that like instead of having like, okay, like as far as like we're talking about media, like things that like don't require racism, like media culture, like I just think like it's something wrong with having Italian, black, white culture on like certain things, but then when it comes to like for example, like when I bring up certain aspects of culture, like when we talk about movies or TV shows, like to me, like I just think that like it's kind of futile to like, oh well, I don't like that show because that's a black show and it's a white show, but it's all like American shows, right? Like we're all like American, right?
I'm not following you. I'm trying to nail down. Slow down for a second. Hold on. Slow down for a second. Maybe make a cohesive argument, because I really genuinely want to understand your position. We're bouncing around a little. Why is culture effective only at a national level?
Because I feel like that's when you kind of like really truly like kind of bring people together, and there's less of a strife to it. Because like if we just have culture on like, okay,
I got a question real quick. Do you believe that culture's purpose or its efficacy is measured by how multicultural it is, by how much it brings people together?
Well, not necessarily, but what I'm saying is that if you live in like the same country, like you occupy the same land, and you're occupying this country that's made up of like different types of cultures, it's like I just don't like you don't see it kind of like futile to like where like different races gatekeep their culture. Like for example, like rap is created by Black Americans, Black and Latinos, but it's still an American.
Okay, what's one of the most racist countries in the world currently is Japan. Japan is super fucking racist. Like if I go over to Japan and I marry a Japanese woman and I have a baby, that child is still not Japanese and is not allowed to do all kinds of shit based off the fact that she's a half or he's a half, right? So like, it's not until that person who's grown up in Japan their whole life marries another Japanese person, and then that 3/4 Japanese person can be considered Japanese, right? And like, able to use certain services, have government jobs. You can't even write a light novel. It's technically something else if you're a hafu, because you're not Japanese enough to be able to write a fucking comic. You know what I mean? Like, it's wild. I don't know that that's necessarily like the worst thing ever, that culture is exclusionary into a certain degree by maintaining its traditions and its values. I think it has drawbacks for sure, but I think that culture is effective at doing that. I don't know that a culture necessarily should be measured as good or bad or effective based solely upon its ability to get people to come together. Because there are cultures that are intentionally exclusive to the other that do the coming together thing at a local level very effectively. The Amish would be a great example. This is a very exclusive culture that pushes out, and it makes a homogenous group, and the group is made better based upon what they value because of the culture and the strict kind of in group preference rules, etc.
No, I'm not like if a country is, as long as they're not like, physically killing or hurting somebody, I understand that. If a neo-Nazi wants to do his thing, I don't have to like it as long as I'm hurting nobody and me. Fine. If in Japan is like, in America, we like it's actually 57% white, so like still kind of in the majority, but like we have a lot of diversity here. In Japan, it's like they maybe have different ethnicities of the Japanese, but they're not like of different like races. I'm not saying there are other people, but for the most part, like they're more homogenized, right? Well, what I was saying is that, like, yeah, I'm fine if like Black, Latino, we have our own. I just think that like on the grand scheme of things, it's just like because Black culture is American culture, white American culture is American culture. Because like if you think about it, like I just think like sometimes it you know it's not.
I looked it up. 98.5% of Japan is Japanese.
Japanese, yeah. Like, and the thing is, like,
that's a big fucking percentage. God damn.
Like for me, I don't think it's wrong to be proud of like you're a man or you're like a color or whatever, stuff like that, like a race. But to me, like if you're born and raised in the same nation, like I think in America we have like our racism kind of, I feel like it comes from like, and just like the more kind of like atrocious, the more kind of evil parts of racism, it comes from the fact that like sometimes we gatekeep our own culture, like it's not even like American, or not even like, even though it's different parts, but it's all like American. Like for me, like, and this is just me, right? Like it's cool that like rap music was created by my own people, but then it's also cool that white Americans listen to rap, right? I think the left is very segregational to that point where like, oh well, if you're white or a man, you're being a patriarchal like white supremacist, and it's like, well, I think wasn't the whole point like to end racism? And
yeah, I mean, I don't know necessarily what this has to do. I think we've gone a little off the rails in terms of
off the rail, but like
libertarianism. But no, I'll dig into this a little. Using Japan as an example again, Japan is famous for cultural appropriation as a standard operating procedure of its culture, right? Even in the tale of Genji, which is likely the oldest piece of literature, like written fiction story, most likely written by a woman of the court in Japan, but they're borrowing haikus all the time, and they talk about how amazing it is, and how they just steal shit, like the foo dogs, even they just steal shit. Like if something works, they're just like, yeah, it's cool. And Japanese people are famous for like when other some random like mixed black girl whose dad is white and makes six figures, goes to college, and all of a sudden gets really into their blackness, despite the fact that they're half white and they're a socialist, gets real upset because some other white person wore a kimono. It's the Japanese that step in and go, dude, fuck off. We love when white people appreciate our kimonos. Like, we love when people appreciate our culture. And they intentionally have a cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation kind of paradigm within of themselves. The idea of cultural appropriation is certainly something that is destroying America in its culture, right? But I mean, that is critical theory and Marxist leftist philosophy that is promulgating within the cultural hegemonies as Antonio Gramsci wanted. This is more of an effect of modern day Marxism or cultural Marxism having effects. And so libertarianism, I think, does have something to say about this as an individualist philosophy to a certain degree, especially being a camp in much the same way that conservatives are. But yeah, ultimately, I think that is, I understand what you mean now when you say that like there's a certain efficacy and strength to bringing people together, and the effectiveness of culture, because you're comparing it to exclusionary cultures that try and impose on other people that their culture be sacred and separate and gatekept from other people, as opposed to shared in such a way that we all learn from each other. I think both can be good. I think ultimately, like, if we're talking about what I personally value, I do value openness in culture. The problem is that it's like the cell membrane, right? The human cell membrane, right? The cell membrane is a phospholipid biolayer. And what that means is that it is intentionally repels water on both edges until it uses a system of diffusion and sometimes active diffusion as a means, as multiple different ways of getting water into the cell if the cell becomes thirsty, if you will. And so I think culture works the same way a cell membrane works, which is that if it's too open, it becomes flooded and dies. And if it's too closed off, it lacks nourishment. And only a free people that can respond to demands can engage in understanding what their culture is like in that way. And some cultures, unfortunately, will die because they didn't learn the appropriate lessons quick enough before it was too late. But I don't think there's an appropriate, I think every culture is different, and there's kind of an appropriate level of letting shit in, or because when you let shit out and you become open, it's kind of a two-way street. You end up letting shit in. And sometimes you need to gatekeep in order to maintain the cohesiveness of your community or your culture without it simply dying. So just becoming a menu item at the local Mexican restaurant as opposed to an actual culture.
So libertarianism would essentially, if you repeat that again, like when it comes to like culture, racism, what is like the most simplest way? What is the libertarian solution to that?
The libertarian solution is to let people figure it out for themselves. But the difference is that we wouldn't impose this. So like, we wouldn't impose nationalist ideals of protecting one's own culture, but we also wouldn't impose anti-discrimination situations and like forced multiculturalism. Instead, what you would have is the freedom in your community to gatekeep and maintain your culture as you see fit. And yet there will also probably be metropolis city centers that are like full-blown multicultural with like laws of like anti-discrimination laws and shit. And like, where do you want to live? What society do you want to live in? Maybe you're 18 and you lived in a small town. It's very Orthodox Christian. You want to get the fuck away from all these weirdos and all these people, and you want to go move to the big city that's multicultural, and you want to soil your fucking oats and fuck people and have fun and party and do drugs and get a tech job. And then one day you're 32 years old and you realize that you made a fucking mistake and that life really was better when you were in a small community of people that valued the same things that you now realize you valued all along, but you were running away from. And you do a deep apology and you say, I want back in that community. And depending upon how that community acts, they might look at you and say no. Or they might look at you and say, welcome back, brother. And the strength of that community might depend upon how willing they are to say no. And that might preserve something that multiculturalism would have destroyed for years and years and years. But nationalism destroys this shit too. Nationalism and like forced integration and like forcing a monoculture leads to a stagnant fascistic society that doesn't actually maintain the important things, because a central planning state that's trying to like maintain things comes with all of these other consequences and an inability to adapt to new technologies and ways in which the culture needs to be preserved with new ways of life. When the train is invented, culture changes. And like using the state to try and enforce an old culture that doesn't work might cause more problems than it solves.
Yeah. I like I said, I'm not like advocating for like, it's weird because I'm not advocating for nationalism, even though like National Socialism is an aspect of it, because the Nazis were socialists, they were National Socialists. But like, I think
Nazis
like,
are weird.
Yeah, Nazis are weird, but I think like you can see where I'm coming from. Like, yeah, I'm fine for like, okay, you have your community. But I think for more kind of like bigger cultural things like movies and music, I just like, and teach their own, right? I just think it's weird. It's like, well, I'm not gonna listen to that, even though like it's like I'm not gonna listen to that because that's a white thing, right, or a black thing. Like, especially like if you live in the same country, right? And like for example, in what I was mentioning is like what I was mentioning before is like, for the most part, yeah, you do have black, but you appear white. Like me and you have more in common. I would argue you have more in common with me as far as like the way we talk, our culture, right? Like than a white person that's in like in France or whatever, and stuff like that. Yeah. And so like I think like a lot of times it's like certain like
I don't try and burn cars when my football team loses. Very different people. Yeah.
Very different, yeah. And I guess in the ANCAP society we would have open borders, right? I've heard that
no,
before,
you
right?
have private borders.
No. We have private borders. Okay.
Right.
Because
so like some communities might have a rule about open borders or whatever. Ultimately all property would be private property. And I get to decide who comes on my fucking property one way or the other.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
so a lot of ANCAPs are pro open borders. I'm not, but a lot are when it comes to the government, because they're like, fuck the government. You don't own these borders, and you don't get to tell me who I get to hire to come work in my factory or who I get to rent to based upon some arbitrary distinction that you, the illegitimate state, created. And I understand that. I'm hopping on it. And if you want to learn more about that, Liquid Zulu and I debated that for like a long time. You can check out the debate between Liquid Zulu and I on that. It's a long debate between the two different positions on borders. But like, that's why it's not so much that they're for open borders everywhere. They're against the state's capacity to say that these are their borders, because fuck you, you don't own borders.
Yeah. And like I said, like you said, the joke, 6 months until a minarch becomes an anarch and everything.
Yeah.
But what about science? Like, because I definitely would want science to be privatized. Like, I do think like the government does a terrible job. You know what I mean? Because most scientists tend to work for the government, whether they get grants or they directly work for the government. And, our tax system does a terrible job because our tax system goes to like so many different areas. And I love science. Like, it's the
like $250,000 to study a diverse, set of crickets to determine whether or not this is an endangered species of cricket. So we can't build a dam here.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that. Thanks for stopping clean energy for fucking 6 years so some white lady at some etymologist white lady can study a fucking bug. Thanks, government.
Yeah. And then also you got physics and astronomy, chemistry, and because like it's all responsible for technology, and then of course capitalism.
Yeah, I don't see the issue here. Like, I think science would be, I mean, you already have kind of a competition of science. In the sense that you already have all of these other nation states, right? Yeah. That's kind of the cool thing about science, is that it's not like competition for the new cell phone, right? It's like it's competition on knowledge. So you can already see that different places produce science, different findings. Some of which is because of a lack of rigor, and we can kind of tell that, and we can look at poor methodology. Iran's a great example of this. There's a lot of bad science that comes out of Iran. But then sometimes different cultures study different things, and they see things a little bit different. And so, we can see that, like, for example, the trans kid shit, big leftist fucking place. The Nordic countries are like, hey, we've been looking at the science, fuck off. And it's weird to see them kind of leading that charge, because they're known to be fairly progressive culture, but they just see shit different. So I think the same thing will occur. We already have a competition of science within the private industry, but a lot of it is ideologically motivated. So you see a lot of Christian websites and things like that put out bad science. Problem is that academia is putting out bad science. So I don't know what the anarchist solution is. What I can say though is that when you have a government that steals money to fund research, how does that research get funded? Is that research is going to study things that interest the state and what it is that the state wants, and presumably things that might be popular within academia, within those institutions. And so I think what you will see is a much better, much more accurate system of science and a much more functional or utility-based form of science. So you might see less studying a cricket, for example, which could be a tragedy in some means. Maybe it was really important to study that cricket. Maybe that cricket had the cure to fucking cancer. Now it's dead, and we gave up the cure to cancer for a fucking well. I don't know. But what I will say is you can't win them all. You can't study everything indefinitely. And so what I think what you'll see is you'll see science that has a profit motive behind it. That like there's something to gain from this knowledge. And that knowledge might even be gatekept in some way so that they can compete with other companies while they're trying to maintain secrets.
Yeah. And it's weird because like, even like, you're right, because scientists because even during the Cold War, like the American and Russian scientists working for the government, they were competing. This is snap. And then like capitalism is competition. And like the good thing is like they'll get enough funding for like the projects they'll do. And then, because science is that's why we saw such a boom in technology. Is that we had a competitor. Is that we were desperate to be able, both in the space race and in like, the arms race, to be able to outflex the USSR. And the USSR was doing the same thing to us. And so that natural competition drove us to produce functional results. We weren't wasting fucking millions of dollars on gender studies programs in Pakistan because we were like, we need to build the next bomb. It's not good, right? It's not the way that I want shit funded, but it does show you that there was a technological boom, and like so many things were made better because they were trying to build better bombs, right? And because we learned all kinds of cool shit in physics and technology and plastics and styrofoams and microwaves and like so many things that are just day-to-day technologies now exist because of the space race and like nuclear arms. Yeah. And then there's also, I think, Michio Kaku. He was like, so for some reason he supports capitalism to a certain extent. Most scientists, they tend to. I think Albert Einstein was a socialist. I think Newton was pretty a capitalist, whatever. But like he talked about how like the physics created the blueprint for all the computers and microwaves, radios, and all that. And then it was capitalism that took this and made it available to the public. And I think like Second Thought made something about how like capitalism ruined the internet. But then I argue that like if it wasn't for capitalism, we wouldn't have be on the internet. Even though I do think like the internet is kind of like a little bit of a not a toxic place, but it has kind of gone down because more and more things are kind of like monopolized. But I remember that like
I can't fucking imagine the internet without capitalism, so it's hard to make that argument. You know what I mean? Like I think it's a kind of a dumb argument when people start to get super into their crystal ball. Like without capitalism, what? Who? Okay, a Nosferatu. Like, tell me how the entire fucking internet would have. Tell me the alternate fucking timeline in your fucking. You're writing science fiction, and then and then that's your argument is to write science fiction. Like you don't fucking know what the world would look like without that. Like what? Who fucking knows?
And then he was like, oh, then you can make the argument on social media, but it's like even if you didn't have social media, the free market or capitalism would have just. It would have taken internet in a different route. But I would argue that, like, I mean, we're around the same age, right? You remember, like, the early days of the internet. Like, nobody was really on it. You know what I mean? Like, that early days, it was cool. It was cool that we had options. And YouTube was kind of nice. But then YouTube, it was kind of nice that people uploaded any type of videos. But then, like... I think
the internet was pretty big. A lot of people weren't on it because they didn't have computers. So they didn't own internet. Or, if you go back far enough, because they ran out of AOL or fucking Netscape fucking hours of internet and they needed to wait until they could buy more internet. until dial-up became a thing, or mom was on the phone so they weren't on the internet. So yeah, a lot less people were on the internet, but also it was very segregated. You had to. I remember the days where you had to type. You didn't have Google, and so because you didn't have Google, you had to type out every web page that you went to. You couldn't just find shit, and there wasn't like these big aggregates of like social media. So it was like you went to eBomb's World or albinoblacksheep.com and like checked out fucking funny videos or flash games. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how we got onto that, because I don't know, some socialists on the internet said something. I mean, I'm all down for this conversation, but also it is content, so I want to focus a little bit before I like hop out of here.
Yeah. Okay, but like the whole thing is like that's how an ANCAP would handle all these things and everything. Like in an ANCAP, would there be how many in a multiple, like would there be multiple internet companies? How would it function in an ANCAP world? Like, could we go back to those like kind of Wild Wild West days?
I mean, it's hard to tell. Now I can give you solutions to perceived problems, and I can imaginatively figure out how a company might solve that problem. But ultimately, if I can answer all of these questions, then central planning would work, right? Like communism. If I could answer all of your questions perfectly, then communism would be successful, and we wouldn't be AMCAPs. Because at the end of the day, that would mean that like one person could figure out the entire fucking economy and market and plan things out in a way that actually worked, as opposed to the free market. Ultimately, we'll have to see what the fucking free market does. What I will say is that government red tape and things like that and regulations stood in the way of companies like Clear. You remember Clear? And like, there were companies that were using cell phone 4G LTE technology when it was first coming out, and 3G LTE as a means of providing internet. And a lot of regulations and red tape came into that. And so there's our internet currently is pretty monopolized. Google owns a couple of hubs, Viacom owns a couple. The internet traffic's kind of, I don't want to get too far out of my technical expertise, right? But like it kind of all goes to the same place. And the same places. There's a couple of places, we'll say, in the United States, for example. And so the other thing that's also important to know is that like 97% of the internet is not searchable via Google, because the majority of the internet is run by like cloud systems. It's not the dark web either. It's like cloud systems for like internal internet for like, Bank of America has their own kind of like internet system where they store data and do data transfers so that you can't fucking get into it from like bankofamerica.com. So they have their own shit so that like they can store shit on the cloud without it being a problem. And so I totally foresee multiple internets in competition where there will be like a satellite internet system. There'll be multiple different internets. And people might tell you to go to this website, and for whatever reason, the Comcast company's internet is like fucking Daily Stormer doesn't exist on our shit. And like censorship becomes a thing where some companies don't allow certain things and people are competing. And, I'm like, I could see a robust economic system coming around from that. Or it could be horrible. It's hard to know. Really, it's really difficult to know. But if it is horrible, then that's a market void. And eventually someone will step in with something that isn't fucking horrible. And the government will step in when something is horrible and just throw money at it until the problem is solved. And then everyone will go, yay, the problem was solved. And nobody's thinking about the fact that, sure, in that instance, the government took a problem that the market wasn't solving and immediately solved that problem. But the way that they solved that problem was by throwing regulations, red tape, and money at a situation which stops future companies from solving the problem, makes the entire thing worse in the long in the long run, despite making it better in the short run, and use tons and tons of stolen resources in government offices to fix it. And it's like, when you reiterate that idea 1,000 times or 10,000 times, you get into a situation where you have a government like we have in the United States, where somewhere between 40 to 60% of all wealth is taxed. And it's like, who knows what the fucking world looks like where 2/3 of our money isn't taken and stolen from us.
Yeah. Well,
who fucking knows?
I mean, the argument though is like, because I think private roads is easy because everybody wants roads, business want roads and everything. And I think when you were talking earlier to this Tanky, whatever, you were mentioning, you put like toll roads and stuff like that, and then I can make the argument, it's like, well, what's the difference between that and a tax, right? Like, I'm just trying to put it as both, like, wouldn't it be better?
It's real simple. The government steals your money and is in no way, shape, or form in competition, so they waste the overwhelming majority of that money not doing a good job of upkeeping the roads. And then the roads look like shit and they suck, and you still end up having to pay tolls all the goddamn time anyway, right? Whereas in a competitive sense, if you're forced to pay tolls, everyone sees the money then and there, right?
Yeah.
And so they do one of two things. What will likely happen is people will probably pay for like an easy pass, right? People will pay their car insurance company, like, or whatever company, a flat amount of money based upon how much they fucking drive, and be like, I pay a subscription service and here's how much I pay. Just like Netflix.com, but it's toll roads made easy, or whatever. And I pay toll roads made easy, and I put a little fucking thing in there, and like, whatever, fucking my GPS has a fucking thing that like knows what type of toll road thing I have, right? And and it funnels me to those roads, right? Or it attempts to do it so long as there's a route to do it, and it's like, hey, you can go to this other road, but you got to pay in cash. This one, for whatever reason, isn't done by toll roads made easy, but it'll save you 20 minutes. And you're like, all right, fuck it, I'll pay the $2, right? And so when that's the thing, when people have to compete financially, as opposed to just stealing your money, it'll be way more efficient and way more effective. And so right off the bat, you'll be paying less money. Like, overall as a nation, less money will be wasted refilling the same pothole over and over again to justify the VDOT budget. The second thing is that this allows for different levels of service. See, like, if you go to one state or another, you'll notice that like some states have really good roads and some states have really shitty roads. And really shitty roads are cheaper to maintain and probably cost less money to if you put a toll system up. But really nice roads are less damaging to your vehicle. So the question then becomes, well, what do you value more? Do you value the high time preference decision of fucking up your car for a really cheap road because you're broke and you need to get to work? And that's a choice that you can make, especially if it's a temporary choice. Or are you a truck driver and what you really need is to take care of your fucking 18-wheel? And so you're willing to pay more money for really fucking good roads. And so what this means is more freedom, more choice, less costs, less taxes. It's really fucking that simple. It's like the system people are arguing for is just retarded.
Yeah, no, like, I actually, like, you have convinced me for the most part. Like, but I'm just, like I said, I want to know, obviously, as I tell the people, because I think the argument is, I'm coming at this as like a road is a common good. This and that, right? But then if you realize that because of taxes, nothing is truly free anyways. You know what I mean? I think the appeal to a public road is that it's like you don't have to voluntarily exchange it, but then you involuntarily exchange it with your taxes. So it does it, and then you can say, well, there's people that can't pay taxes, and then but then the same scenario could be the same thing.
Yeah,
it's like,
but it's true. You're right. There are poor people that have a really hard time paying taxes, right? Yeah. And so here's the thing. if you live in a society where where a lot of things have to be paid for, like toll roads, for example, and I go to you as a job, I want to get a job at company A. Company A offers me $15 an hour. I'm like, hey, dude, commute's going to be $10, $15 a day. I need $17 an hour. What you begin to understand is that we live in a world where corporations and companies pay you shit money because they're taxed heavily, and those taxes pay for a bunch of services. Whereas if we live in a world where those taxes don't pay for those services, you're not going to get out of bed to go drive to a job that isn't providing you salary that's meaningful towards all the shit you have to pay for. And so people are just going to make more money. And if you don't believe me, if you believe, well, that's a pie in the sky idea, it's really simple. If I have a company and I need employees to do shit, I have to pay them enough money to show up to do said shit. And if for whatever reason, I can't get people to come in because I'm not paying them enough to pay for rent and pay for rights enforcement agency and pay for roads, etc., then I have to pay them more. The thing is that what people don't realize is that a corporation that hires them is paying like a 29% tax rate. And then all the upper executive rich people, well, they're paying taxes on their salary. And then you're paying taxes on your salary. And then the corporation has to match the fucking Medicare and Medicaid taxes that you pay and payroll taxes that you pay. They're also paying. So at the end of the day, these companies are like, they're taxed to fucking hell by having employees. And it's like, when you get rid of all of those taxes, they might keep all that money for themselves. I don't fucking know. But like, a lot of that money is obviously going to come to you if they want to fucking hire you. And if they don't, some other company is willing to make a 10% profit instead of a 40% profit and will hire you for $30 an hour.
Yeah. Well, you could,
all the free shit you're paying for by having a shitty job is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Too long didn't read. When some company that gives you a shitty paid job is paying taxes, they're paying taxes on your behalf and they pay you shitty. But if they didn't pay those taxes, they wouldn't be able to afford you at that shitty salary.
Yeah. Well, to be fair though, let's say is ANCAP is on taxes, and then the company, the corporation, business, whatever. Say what?
Well, your covenant community might have taxes. You might move to a place with taxes.
Well,
if you want.
Then, you take this way, then what's stopping from that company from just not paying their employees enough wages and just hoarding up all the wealth?
The employee,
even if you
you know what I mean? Like, if you don't pay me enough money to show up for work, guess what happens? Either I don't show up for work, or I do show up to work and I'm really fucking shitty employee. Because if I have good skills, I'm going to go to a better company. So what that means is the people that don't pay people enough, they get what they deserve. They get unmotivated, low skill employees that don't get shit done and piss off people that they have to interact with. And they end up with a shitty company that goes out of business.
Yeah. Well, because I would argue, because in the industrial revolution before minimum wage, it was like companies were just paying their employees anything, and I guess they were paying good high level of taxes, whatever, or not, whatever. And then
before the minimum wage, you also have no education. You have a massive population that's uneducated with no technical skills, right? Okay. They're paying them what they deserved. It's just that nobody had any fucking skills except for subsistence farming, and nobody had any fucking education. That's why they were all paid shit, horrible wages. It wasn't until over time somebody fucking worked a shit factory job and was smart enough to not lose their hands so that they could work a shit factory job their whole life, that they got to send their son to go learn to read and write and and like understand basic arithmetic. And then because their son had basic arithmetic skills and could read and write, he was able to get a much better job than his dad was because he had marketable skills, right? It's like, we like to shit on these people because like they weren't paid enough. And it's like, yeah, it wasn't fucking communist. Like, we don't just give people unearned money. We gave people fucking jobs based off of what they were fucking worth. And the default state of man was poverty. And it's like, you can either work in this fucking factory or you can go work on a subsistence farm. But if you work on a subsistence farm, your children are going to grow up on that farm and they're going to be subsistence farmers. If you come work in this factory and you bust your ass, your kids might grow up to be educated, and then you're going to get out of this. And if you work hard and bust your ass, you might be able to break the cycle of poverty and begin to build the first middle class that ever existed in human history. It's like, we look back at that and go, how horrible of those evil, greedy capitalists. And I look back at that and go, how fucking amazing that human beings were able to do that. That's an amazing fucking achievement. And like, we bitch because they didn't have that much money. Well, I don't see you bitching at cavemen because tooth decay existed. Like, the times were different.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like.
Well, I was gonna. No, I mean, because I'm just asking these questions, and like I said, after doing all the information, how government, creates monopolies and messes up the free market, I definitely agree with all this after looking up like everything, right? The facts point towards all this, right? And in all the scenarios, and even then, like all the scenarios I had asked you about, because I wasn't too sure, like, because I'm trying to like learn this more. Obviously, it's not going to be a perfect system, and I think we know this because life isn't perfect, right?
Yeah.
And I guess like you could say, well, there'll be hierarchies, but like you see, hierarchies are natural, right? Like you had said earlier, like
tennis instructor,
even ranking like the top 5 greatest basketball players, that's a hierarchy in a sense. Like Michael Jordan is
it's like hierarchies exist. Why? What am I going to pull random Diamond League players to come play in my esports, League of Legends tournament? No. You know what I mean? Like, they suck. I'm going to fucking pull nothing but grandmasters, and it's going to be like 70% Koreans. And that's just how that shit works.
Yeah. And like, you're never gonna force equality, but also like I said, and I think I was like, because I'm new at this time, because I was telling us, it's like, well, it's not gonna be perfect. I would argue that like all this stuff had mentioned, I thought about like how like a company could just centralize or whatever, like buy all the military and monopolize and come down your door, and it's like, well, ANCAP, you don't have a barrier to competition, and then somebody would fill in that void, and then that would loss in profit. Because
this is a bad idea.
It's just a bad idea, because even monopolies, I was thinking about like let's say if Disney owned all of the industry right now, let's say it owned all the industry, gaming, video game, everything, right? And media, everything, sports, right? And like it becomes a parent company and everything still functions, but like how Lucasfilm still functions as Lucasfilm, even though it's owned by Disney, and everybody works there, right? And then it owns all the products it buys. It's like, that's terrible for business, because you're not making any new money, and then you would have a stable economy, but then like everything just falls apart. You know what I mean? Like, well, it's like
IP is a weird one because ANCAPs don't believe in IP. Societies might choose to institute IP in order to make business more beneficial, but you're going to see people violating IP all the fucking time. I don't know. We're 2 hours in. I don't know that I necessarily want to get into that whole conversation again, and that might be a point of contention that you have. And maybe we'll talk some other time about it, because it's a big. I think it changes the way capitalism looks once you recognize that IP isn't legitimate, in my opinion.
Well, yeah. And before I let you go, like I hope, like I said, I just wanted to know more, like for
yeah. Well, let me leave you with this.
I wasn't wasting time.
No. I'm not. I'm just saying. Let me leave you with this. The greatest example of like this monopolization of resources and business and everything, probably OPEC Plus. It's oil, and the funny thing is that even OPEC Plus, buoyed by all of these governments, with a product that is extremely extremely elastic, right? Because the whole world runs on oil. So like people will pay whatever the fuck they have to pay to get oil. It's very, very elastic. It's not like most products where there's a breaking point where people will just go, okay, well, I'm not buying your fucking product. Even in that system, the cartel breaks all the time. Every couple of years, somebody in OPEC Plus breaks and just starts flooding the market with cheap barrels of oil, and the price goes back down even when they try and price fix it. And yet you have billionaires all across the world doing everything they can to maintain this monopoly, because this monopoly can't fucking survive without it. In an ANCAP society, we wouldn't worry about global warming because we'd all be because oil is a fucking short-term bad solution. It's economically a shit idea. And we also wouldn't have wind and solar. You know what we'd have? We'd have fucking dams, we'd have geothermal, and we'd have nuclear in most places. So if you want another reason as a lefty, to anybody in the audience watching, you know, it's free. Get rid of these fucking governments and institute capitalism. And what you end up with most likely is really fucking clean energy everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Not monopolies. I'm sorry. But yeah, if there's anything you want to ask before we get out of here, please do so now. I'm starting to lose my throat. I have my kids this weekend.
Oh yeah, I get that.
And I got a busy weekend. Well, I have an autistic son, so like, when I have two toddlers for the weekend and one of them's autistic, it's. I don't want to say I love him to death. He's my pride and joy, but it's a challenge, and so it's a lot of extra steps. So it's tiring.
And there was definitely like the medical question that's different. But as far as IP, like at first I was like I said the quick thing, but then like you're right. Like I think that IP is such a frustrating thing, and like you said, it's like I think the problem is that like if there's I guess who would develop an official canon, and it's like, well, would people create anything new? And I guess people would still creating stuff new, but then it's like if everything is just in the public domain, it's like, well, I could come in like I don't have to write a script. I could just say, hey, let me just make my own version. But then also like the flip side is that you get to see everybody's version of like hey, Star Wars or Mortal Kombat or this and that. Like, what is their take on it?
Well, so like, let's take the worst case scenario. I'll do a quick consequentialist analysis, being honest about economics as opposed to the socialists that are pro IP, which also known as Republicans. So against that, right? So let's just assume we live in a society with no IP. Worst case scenario is drugs. How do we get money for new drugs that require billions of dollars in investment? When the moment that a drug comes out, I put it out onto the market, and then somebody takes my copy, right? And utilizes it, right? Well, let's say it's really actually not that difficult for a company to just create a contract that says, if you purchase my fucking drug, right? And you utilize my drug, if you attempt to reverse engineer said drug, or you sell it to someone that is willing to if you reverse engineer my drug and make any profit off of said drug from reverse engineering it, then you owe me the profits. And people go, well, that's IP. And it's like, well, yeah, it's IP, except you voluntarily agreed to do it before you utilize that drug. Like, you can make a contract that says, hey, look, fuckface, if you're going to use my drug, if you're going to purchase my drug, in order to purchase my drug, you must agree to this. And you have to sign this contract or you're not allowed access to my drug. Now, you might get access to the drug some other way. You know what I mean? But like, someone is going to have to take on the burden of that. So there's that. And I don't know how well that'll work out. I don't know how well the courts will uphold those things. There'll be a lot of gray areas. There'll be a lot of landmark cases. There'll be a lot of challenges. Like, the world will look crazy and there'll be weird ways that we figure it out. But I imagine that there will be a lot of places that institute things like IP, voluntarily in such a way that it benefits everybody. Even though in situations like that. But ultimately, when you say intellectual property is mine, what you're really saying is you are a slave to me. And the reason is if I write book A and you copy book A and create book B, which is a 1-to-1 replica of book A, and I say you owe me money because you copied my book, what I'm really saying is I own your printing press. I own your property. Your property is my property because you used it in a way that was utilizing something that I did before. And that's bullshit. There's no real logic to it. And I think IP stands in the way in a lot of scenarios, causes a lot of problems.
It's weird because, like, I think Liquid Zulu had pointed out, like, artists shouldn't only own art. But the irony is that most artists don't even own the art because of IP, because the corporations, the studios and everything own them. Because they use the studios to record the music. Yep. And, like, IP is, like, because it's like, well, you did this in my property. How
do rappers make money? Rappers don't make money off album sales. Rappers don't make money off of YouTube video ad revenue. They don't make money off of any of that shit. Almost every rapper that's in a contract that has a record label, right? So with the exception of like, independent, which is a very small fraction of people that own their own mix and masters and shit, right? Which is even a higher level because a lot of times people will buy mixes and beats and things like that, and then they don't really own the beats, so they don't own all their ad revenue. It gets complicated. But with the exception of independent rappers that make their own beats and own their mix and masters, which is a very small percentage, they all make their money from merchandise sales and ticket sales at shows, which is how they would do it if IP didn't exist to begin with.
And then it's like even with like YouTube, it's crazy because I think I'm getting the point of like abolishing IP, because like even I make videos and sometimes like I usually don't monetize them, but then it's like, oh, copyright this because I use a clip and everything. It's like I'm not even trying to make money off of it. I'm just trying to use it as far as like promotional, kind of like promote my art more and stuff like that. I just don't see like I think like as long as you get credit to like the original audio or movie clip, and then it's like you gotta like pay this. It's like it's crazy.
Dog, all my videos get demonetized. I want to let you know, like it's like 70% of my videos get demonetized. So it's like whatever.
You're right, like IP in a lot of ways is violation of private property, because then it's like if you don't do that, like it violates yours, and then they can use the court, and then they're using the state and everything. And you're right, rappers like most, like very even in movies, because I'm like that. Like George Lucas was one of like only few directors, even with his business skills not being that much, like only really few filmmakers that owned his work in Star Wars before he gave it up to Disney. But even with IP, it's like you look at what Disney has done to Star Wars.
He owned all of the merchandise, which is very rare for a film company. He was like, no, I want all the rights for merchandise. And then Star Wars sold so many fucking toys. And that's how he got fucking rich and famous, was that he happened to own all the merchandise rights. And and it worked out real well.
And then it's like, well, you take like people, I did make the argument without IP, like people would just be lazy and then they could just, but then it's like, even with IP, it's like Disney just buys it out and does like a terrible job with Star Wars for the most part. And it's like, I mean, well, what's the point of IP?
The expanded universe was 100 times better than anything Disney has made, with the exception of season 1 and like most of season 2 of The Mandalorian. Basically everything Disney, you see, I was going to tell you I got to leave, but I'm a hardcore Star Wars fan. So you've pissed me off. You've pissed me off by bringing this up. But I'm just saying, like, Disney didn't have to do anything. It was already there. Even if we don't take George Lucas's scripts that he was writing, you could have done Children of the Jedi, and then like the Yuzong Vong Wars, and like Admiral Thrawn's trilogy. Like there was already amazing stories there, but Disney bought it and then just ruined it for political sake to like make Mary Sue's and stupid shit. And it's like for a bunch of people that don't love Disney. And it's like we all know in our heart of hearts, except for the Zoomers, that ain't Star Wars. That's
Star Wars,
Disney. That's Disney shit. And you know what? I love Disney for one thing only. I thought that the original trilogy was like the only real Star Wars with the expanded universe, and I thought the prequels, you know, just weren't that good. But like, man, you made the prequels look so fucking amazing.
I ain't gonna lie, I love the prequels. Like, there are Star Wars like Revenge of Sith rocks. Like, there's bad execution, but at least it expands that world. Like, there's world.
Yeah, I mean,
like the sequels have good execution, but they have bad world building. It is just original trilogy, made terrible. Like
it's all trash. It's all trash. This is the terror of fucking IP. All right.